We are recording. And the theme for the rest of this month and the first week in February is back to basics. This morning the topic is free to be me. Most of you know January is the month that we take time to take a special look at the science of mind, what it is and what it means in our lives. So today is the first of that series of 4 talks. What it is, where it came from, and how we bring it into our lives in each and every moment. And I'm actually paralleling the first 4 chapters of the Science of Mind text. If you want to do some review, the thing itself, what it is, how it works, and how to use it. You can go back and review those 4 chapters anytime. The meat, the core of this teaching is in those first 4 chapters. And this has been my own pathway for many years, learning how my relationship with God plays out in the universe in the moments of my own life. Experiencing those changes that take place, like you heard earlier in Standing in the Light, when we allow ourselves to be open, to be receptive, to be trusting to the greatness within. And central to the core of the philosophy of the science of mind is the process we call spiritual mind treatment, prayer treatment, or affirmative prayer. Ernest Holmes, the founder of religious science, science of mind, was very clear in his choice of words when he created the term spiritual mind treatment. And if you listen to his talks from the days when he was speaking extemporaneously, or he was orating, he was teaching, he always emphasized the word mind in that phrase, spiritual mind treatment, because he wanted to be very sure that all of us were connected in the mind, the individual mind and the universal mind, when we were doing this, so that it would not be just rote, but rather we are choosing our words, we are choosing our thoughts, and we are choosing the direction of our thoughts and our words. And he explained that effective spiritual mind treatment is propelled by a consciousness of love and of realization that creative spirit is always at work. We need not feel that we must compel this force to work. It's its nature to work, to take form. He also instructs us that spiritual mind treatment brings into actual manifestation in our lives the health and the happiness which are our normal and natural heritage. This healing power is a consciousness of the unity of all life and the spiritual nature of all being. Spiritual mind treatment is the conscious recognition that health has always been ours, that abundance has always been ours, that happiness and peace have always been ours. They're ours now, for they are the very essence and truth of our being. So this is an exciting time of year. We revisit our beliefs with conscious intention, that we open new avenues in our consciousness to express the truth, the wonder, and the freedom of our being. So each week this month and the first Sunday in February, we'll take a different aspect of science of mind and discuss it. And each week we'll talk more about the use of spiritual mind treatment as a part of our daily spiritual practices. In fact, within the next 2 months, my intention is to work with many of you as are available and requested, on how to do spiritual mind treatment for yourself. We can review the steps in treatment, how to get started when you don't know how to get started, and what to do when it, quote, isn't working, unquote, as the old saying goes. In fact, in preparation for any one of those discussions about what to do when it, quote, isn't working, unquote, read page 52 of the textbook, because Holmes talks about that on page 52. So plan now to take advantage of this opportunity to develop your own prayer power, or to enhance it, to deepen it beyond what you're currently doing. I think most of you have heard me talk about that Frank and Ernest cartoon, which is one of my favorites, and they've been going on for years and years and years ago, years and years. And there's one that I particularly like, along with Teenagers Clean Up Your Room, Then the World. I guess maybe that's my most favorite, but this one's close behind it. Frank and Ernest, in this cartoon, Frank has made a great discovery. And he shares that enthusiastically with his friend Ernest. Frank shouts, "I gotta be me." And Ernest responds, "Who doesn't?" Think about that. I'd like to begin this series by expanding on the title chosen for today's topic, and that is Free to Be Me. If there was ever an example of this in our history, surely that example was Ernest Holmes. Those who knew him described him as kind, warm, generous, spontaneous, gregarious, outgoing, happy, a charismatic speaker, and an effective healer, practitioner. Pretty complete package. Most of all, he was inquisitive, questioning, and expansive in that he wasn't afraid to try new ideas. In fact, he wasn't even afraid to develop new ideas. And as he began to develop this philosophy of science of mind in the early 1900s, he was quick to explain that this philosophy wasn't better necessarily, but that it was a synthesis of all that he had studied. That it was an understandable and practical way to put ideas into practice in our lives. Ernest was born in 1887 in a tiny community of Lincoln, Maine. He was the 9th of 9 boys. Can you imagine? He was named after an itinerant poet, Ernest Shirley, because his parents had run out of boys' names. And I guess the poet came by at the precise right moment. Ernest's mother had been a teacher, and he got his love of study and use of words from her. He was also encouraged by her to question what he heard. And fortunately for the world, that included what he heard in his religious training. Their family attended the Congregational Church in the area, which actually was the only church in this tiny community. The family was very close, and they regularly participated in family activities. Now remember, there was no TV, no movies back then. There wasn't even email or Facebook. So one of their favorite activities was charades. And because there weren't any TV or movie titles to act out, they frequently used words instead. So his mother found fun ways for her boys to learn a love of words and their meanings. And as Ernest's life unfolded and he began to develop his philosophy of the science of mind, that childhood training served him really well. Those of you who have read materials that he has written or listened to him speak know that he had an incredible command of the language, and he used it in a very appropriate way. He was an inquisitive, energetic young man who quit school at age 15. And he went to work and began to educate himself further through reading. At one point, he was living in a boarding house, and he discovered that his kind landlady was really a kindred spirit. And she dared to do her own thinking, even back in those days when that was not common for women to be outspoken in terms of their ideas. She was positive-minded, she was feisty, though she was about 80 years old, which in those days was old. It looks a lot younger to me these days. But at one point she became quite ill. And the local doctor, in his endless rounds, this was when doctors made house calls, to comfort the sick and the needy, he called on her. And she said to him, "Does my doctor think I'm going to live?" And his curt reply to that was no. She said, "Do the neighbors think I'm going to die?" "Yes," he responded. "Well, then I won't," she said. And she didn't. So Ernest's admiration of her independence of spirit gave support to his belief that a life of independent thinking and living was not based upon conventional education or what was already known, so to speak. Already, you see, he was being drawn to people of like mind in his life. In fact, this is what he later came to describe as the law of attraction. So when he was 18, he moved to Boston. His brother Fenwick described his move this way. He said, "And so, straight from the back country, the stony farms and the rich forests of Maine, bringing with him a suitcase full of clothes and a head full of questions, young Ernest Holmes went to Boston." Perhaps the shape of things to come was not clear, but the very air there was charged with the stuff of which they would be made, because Fenwick was one of his first and most arduous followers. And from the date he arrived, Ernest breathed it in deeply. This was a place for him to open up and gain so much more. Through friends, he discovered the essays of Ralph Waldo Emerson. When he read Emerson's essay on self-reliance, he realized that contained within each one of us, there is this universal consciousness that we are one with that which created us. He also read the works of Mary Baker Eddy, studied mental healing, and from that developed a new idea of prayer, that you can change your life by changing your thinking. It's almost like he was the forerunner of what was to come, because now that's mainstream thinking, isn't it? You hear that in a variety of different ways, from a variety of different arenas, but that same thing. Change your thinking, change your life. Suze Ogden, whose music we use a lot on Wednesday night in class, wrote a song about that, and the song goes, "Change your thinking, change your life. Let go of the darkness. You gotta let in the light." So out of Holmes' study of Emerson and Mary Baker Eddy, Thomas Troward, and Phineas Quimby, an American metaphysician, Holmes discovered that God was a good and active force in our lives. Previously, he had seen God as passive, an observer, sometimes a judge. But he came to realize that the mind is what creates, that God comes through us and expresses as us. And we direct that by the communion of our mind with the one mind. Holmes also studied the works of Jesus, and of Jesus he said, he was the most glorious of souls who ever walked the earth at that time. He was a tremendous example of the experience of oneness with God. He was a way shower of truth. He was consciously cosmic. I love that phrase. Consciously cosmic. Holmes describes the Christ consciousness as the universal idea of sonship, of which every person is a member. From Philippians, the 2nd chapter in the New Testament of the Bible, Dr. Holmes reminds us of the quote, "Let this mind be in you, which was also in Jesus." because each of us partakes of that Christ nature to the degree that God is revealed through us. And to that degree, we become the Christ, the universal presence. Now, the degree that God is revealed through us is not on God's terms, it's on our terms. That we choose how much of that God consciousness we allow to flow through us. And to that degree, we are demonstrating the Christ consciousness. Holmes looked upon Jesus from this viewpoint, and he studied Jesus' life as an example of the Christ consciousness. He also saw Jesus as the man, and Christ as the perfection of all humankind. He believed that as the human gives way to the divine in all people, they become the Christ. That we all have this potential. And from the teachings of Jesus, Holmes realized that wholeness, love, health, and harmony are the ultimate reality, the ultimate truth. He saw Jesus as a practitioner, one who spoke his beliefs as truth. And from that sentence, you can springboard into why we now call our prayer professionals practitioners. So Ernest took all this study and learning that he had been doing for almost 30 years. And in 1926, he published the first Science of Mind. He wove the ideas of spiritual leaders, of students and practitioners from throughout history into a synthesis of ideas. At that time, his philosophy was brand new, previously unheard of by most people. But as he began to speak his beliefs, people came by the thousands to listen to him. He spoke this truth as the ultimate reality, and people everywhere were attracted to it and affected by it. Nowadays, these ideas are considered almost mainstream, as science and philosophy have come closer and closer together. Thousands of churches have sprung up, teaching New Thought, as it's popularly called. In truth, we know that New Thought is actually ancient wisdom revisited. One of the people that Dr. Holmes knew and associated with was Albert Einstein. He and Dr. Einstein agreed that peace, world peace, is not an illusion, but a very real possibility, a potentiality. Dr. Einstein said that peace is an evolutionary imperative, and science will aid religion in this evolution. For those of you who are familiar with AGNT, the Affiliated Global New Thought Network, which was started and perpetuated by Barbara Marx Hubbard, that is one of their taglines. Peace is an evolutionary imperative. So what we know is that science is aiding religion or spirituality in its evolution in today's world, as science proves and supports the basic concepts of universal synthesis. Up until about 5 years ago, each year in the fall, a conference was held in Palm Springs, sponsored by the Alliance for Global New Thought, AGNT, where leaders from science, industry, education, government, philosophy, and religion came together to strategize and to report progress in advancing peace, prosperity, and compassion in all areas. And now, after this hiatus, we're beginning to hear that AGNT is ramping up once more to do this kind of coming together, perhaps on a smaller scale than they once did, but nonetheless still intense in bringing together the great thought of the world wherever it is occurring and synthesizing it. You see, when we're free to be ourselves, we realize, we recognize, and we reveal that universal oneness. Can't help it. That universal oneness with God and with each other. Can't help it. Peace is an inside job. We find it in the world when we found it in ourselves. I can't stress that enough. And in these days, if I don't say that at least once a day, call me and remind me. If I don't remind you, you remind me. We find peace in the world when we find it in ourselves and not one instant before. So here we are, the start of a new year, and at the start of a new day, because every day is a new start. There's a divine plan within each one of us, a divine nature that makes all things new in each moment, each day, each year. It's already present in us. We just have to allow it to express. So I want to invite you to declare for yourself that this is so. So please say after me, I am free to be myself. I am free to be myself. There is a divine nature within me. There is a divine nature within me. And I give it permission to express through me now. And I give it permission to express through me now. You see, when our ears hear our own voice speaking these words, we're generating great power. When we speak our word, we come to believe it. And when we believe in something, it reveals itself to us. This is the mind that was in Jesus. This is the mind that's in each one of us. The beginning of a new year. This is a good time to start new things. And certainly last week, to end old things. To release some things, ideas, impressions that no longer serve us. Many of you did that very thing here last week when you participated in the burning bowl. And if you've thought of some other things since then, you can have your own burning bowl ceremony. Or you can call a couple of your Science of Mind friends in and do it again. Being very careful to recognize that one thing at a time. Please don't write an essay. Write a line. Release it. And let it go. So, because just as each cell in our body is constantly replacing itself, making itself new, so too can we do this in our thoughts, in our ideas, in our intentions, and in our actions. Behold, I make all things new. And so can each one of us as we come to believe in ourselves, to trust in the wisdom that created us, and to act on the guidance that we receive. Be free to be yourself and be free. As we go into these new days and weeks and months, let's remember that every moment is a gift. Whatever way we may slip or fall short, that's not the truth of our being. For in the next moment we can start fresh, can't we? We can start anew and know something greater. Knowing that we can access every infinite aspect of being. So I invite you to trust in the wisdom that created you. Recognize that its only desire is to express its magnificence in and through you. Realize that you are made in its image, metaphorically speaking, not physically, because you are so much more than your physical expression, that you are made in the image and likeness of God. Realize that the Christ consciousness is divine nature outpicturing in you, by means of you, through you, as you. Except that you can reveal peace, harmony, and wholeness in your thoughts, in your words, and in your actions. You truly are free. Free to be yourself. So let's say that one more time. I am free to be myself. I am free to be myself. There's a divine nature in me. There's a divine nature in me. And I give it permission to express now. And I give it permission to express now. And so it is.
So it is.